Welcome to the William G. McGowan Theater at the National Archives. I'm Jay Basanko, Deputy Archivist of the United States, and I am pleased that you could join us for tonight's very special program. We are co-hosting tonight's program with our partners at the National Archives Foundation and the March on Washington Film Festival. This evening, we are very fortunate to hear a discussion between Wright and Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. Wright is a journalist, activist, and author. He is the host of the podcast Notes from America with Wright, which explores current events placed within political and historical context. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson is the most recent appointment to our nation's highest court. She was born right here in Washington, D.C., and earned a BA from Harvard Radcliffe College and a JD from Harvard Law School. President Barack Obama appointed her to the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia, where she served from 2013 until 2021. President Joe Biden appointed her to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit in 2021, and then nominated her as an Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court the following year. On June 30th, 2022, Justice Jackson was sworn in, becoming the 104th Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States. We have a long tradition of hosting justices here at the National Archives building, and we are thrilled to have Justice Jackson with us this evening. Justice Jackson has recently released a new memoir, Lovely One, which traces her family's ascent from segregation to her confirmation as the first black female justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. This all occurred within the span of a single generation. And I am looking forward to hearing more about Justice Jackson's journey. Thanks again for joining us tonight. Sit back. We're going to start the program now.
I love that. Don't you love that? Good evening, everyone. My name is Joanne Irby, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Executive Director of March On. March On is an arts and education platform. We deploy art in all its forms: visual, performance, filmmaking, the written word, all of it, in order to advance our mission, which is to tell the untold or mistold stories of the past, using where we've been as a call to action to where we need to go, as a call to march on. Our tagline is stories that move, because we've seen the transformational power of storytelling to move all people of all ages, races, backgrounds, move them toward listening, toward reflecting, toward becoming active parts of something larger than themselves. And while our programming is year-round and nationwide, we are most known for the multi-day arts and film festival that our team produces every year here in Washington, D.C. And so before I go any further, on this penultimate day of our festival, where our team has produced 22 events across 8 days, taking place all over the city, I'd like everyone from the March On team, our amazing staff, volunteers, our board, to stand and wave and be recognized. You all have done a fantastic job, so thank you. Now, I'd like to share a brief story with you. In addition to being part of March On, this year I did a little moonlighting. I had the opportunity to help support Justice Jackson's book tour earlier this year, as she did media appearances and spoke with audiences around the country about her memoir. After one particular media interview, still in the early stages of preparing for the tour, a few of us were debriefing with the justice about how the interview went. And I said, I think it was a really great discussion, but you may have made a little news, Justice, when you said X. And the Justice looked at me for a brief moment and replied, well, it was the truth. I'm comfortable with that. And at that moment, it became crystal clear to me that this remarkable woman was not only a history maker, not only an icon for women and girls and Black people around the world, but she was a truth teller, unapologetically so. And at March On, we love truth tellers. And so truth is what you can expect to hear tonight. How does a woman who does not come from a place of privilege or access, a woman with distinctly African features right down to the roots of her hair, a woman with a non-European sounding name, how is she the one to rise to become the first ever Black woman to serve on the highest court of our land? What were the circumstances behind her ascension? And what can we take from her story to apply as our own personal calls to action, our own efforts to march on? How can her story move you? The Justice will be joined in conversation tonight by Wright, host of New York Public Radio's nationally syndicated podcast, Notes from America, and will be graced by performances by Women of the Calabash, a percussion and vocal ensemble playing music from across the African diaspora. We want to thank our colleagues at AAHF's We the People national campaign for their support and collaboration in producing this event and their ongoing collaboration with Notes from America. I'd also like to thank our wonderful hosts tonight here at the National Archives. I hope our audiences will actually take it upon themselves to come back to visit this gem that is the National Archives. On a night of truth-telling with a history maker, what more appropriate place to be than this place, charged with preserving and sharing the records that tell the collective story of the American people. Finally, I'd like to thank our fantastic sponsors who have supported this year's March On Festival, and a number of whom who truly went above and beyond this year to step into the breach with us. At a time in our country where economic anxiety is real for many communities, it's an important value for us at March On that money not be a barrier for people to be able to access our programs. Because of our sponsors, almost every single event of this year's festival was free of charge, and many events are available for subsequent viewing online. And so, thank you to our sponsors, and I have a special gift on behalf of the sponsors. I'm delighted to share that today's audience members will receive one signed copy of Justice Jackson's memoir, Lovely One. You'll receive the copies as you leave the auditorium. Please take just one. And if you need more than one, there are additional copies available, signed copies in the gift shop. And with that, I'd like to welcome to the stage our moderator, Wright, who will tell you what to expect for this special evening. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Okay, so, there we go. This is the spirit. A few details about what's going to unfold. So as you've heard, Notes from America is a live radio show. It airs on public radio stations around the country every Sunday evening and as a podcast. And what we are going to do here tonight is make tomorrow's show live with you. So it's going to unfold just like we would a normal show. It will start with our theme music, and then I'll sit down. I'll be talking to the radio audience, and we'll introduce the show. We'll take some breaks where the public radio stations get to, ask people for money and all of that great stuff. In those breaks, instead of being asked for money, don't worry, we're gonna let you get wonderful performances from the Women of the Calabash. And all of this means a couple of things for you. So first off, when I come and go from the breaks, when I start the show and I say we're at the National Archives at the March On Festival, and when I do that coming back from the breaks, I would like people in Cleveland and Houston and Los Angeles and Atlanta and everywhere to be like, those people are having a grand time. And I want to get my ticket to March On for next year right now. So when I say that, I want to hear, you know how y'all did when you heard you were getting the free books? I want to hear that at that moment, all right? Second thing this means for you involves your phones. Now, a few things with this, some good, some bad. So I want you to, first off, be prepared to turn your phones off, or at least silence them. Now, you're gonna have an opportunity. We know everybody's gonna wanna take a picture of Justice Jackson, so when I bring her onto the stage, you're allowed to take a picture then. After that, you have to put it away or somebody will escort you out of the building. I'm so serious, so please do that. But also, while you have your phones out, if I may make a shameless plug, we are up for an award. We love to do this, make these live shows. We've done 4 of them this year. One of them that we make in partnership with March On MLK Day at the Apollo is up for an award as the best show in front of an audience of the year. And the cool thing about this award is it's a listener's vote. So if at the end of this, you're like, that was great, I love that, they should win that award, vote for us. Go to our Instagram page. It's Notes with Kai, K-A-I. And if you go into the stories, you'll see a link there where you can go to the Signal Awards and vote for us. And that'll be that. But the most important thing is please, after we start, put your phone away, turn it off, silence it. Everybody will be happier. All right? Okay, so we are going to get started. I'm going to bring out Justice Jackson, and then you'll hear the theme music, and then we'll be rolling. So please welcome to the stage, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. It's Notes from America. I'm Kai Wright, coming to you this week from the National Archives in Washington, D.C. Hello, D.C. All right. This is a special edition of our show. We are here in partnership with We the People as part of the March On Festival, which is dedicated to telling the stories of civil rights movements. Our show has always kept history at the center of our conversation, and this week, we have the incredible opportunity to meet someone whose personal story is now a huge part of the official history of this country. Ketanji Brown Jackson is an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States. She joined the court in June of 2022 after being nominated by President Biden. She is, among many other things, the first Black woman to serve on the High Court. And she joins us today because she has written a best-selling memoir. It's called Lovely One. Justice Jackson, welcome to Notes from America.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
It is such a joy. I have to say, to start us off here, that we are birthday twins.
Are we?
We are indeed. I was also born on September 14th.
Wow.
In the early 1970s. I say that not only to ingratiate myself to you, but also because, you have brought up often that Black people of our age, of our generation, born in that era, that we are the first generation inheritors
Yes.
of the civil rights movement. And I have actually always thought of myself that way.
Yes.
But I wonder if you can just unpack what you mean when you say that, and how that fact of history shapes you.
Oh, my goodness. Well, thank you for having me and for elucidating the fact that you and I have this in common. I say in the book that if Dr. Martin Luther King gave America a metaphorical check come due, our generation was the first to reap the installments.
Yeah.
That we were right there in 1970, which is when I was born, within 5 or 6 years after the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, the end of Jim Crow segregation. And what it meant for me, and perhaps for you, is that my parents, who had grown up in segregation in Miami, Florida, saw this as an opportunity to invest in their daughters' potential in a way that they did not have growing up. They were not allowed to go to public parks and swim in public pools and take music lessons and do all the things. And so when I was born, they said, here's our shot. Our daughter is going to do everything. And they just made sure that I was prepared for the opportunity to live fully in America.
Well, also, I have to say, I mean, I don't know any way to put this other than bluntly, you grew up in a very pro-black house.
I did. I did. My parents had grown up in Miami, but they both went to historically black colleges and universities. My mother went to school at Tuskegee University in Alabama. My dad went to North Carolina Central. And they, really took to heart their African-Americanness. They gave their daughter an African name. When I was born, my aunt was in the Peace Corps in Africa, and my mother asked her to send African names. And when I was born, my parents were both public school teachers, and my dad taught history, and he was part of the development of Black history curriculum in the early 1970s. And so they really were focused.
Here at the D.C. Public Schools.
In the D.C. Public
Right
Schools.
here.
I was born in Washington, D.C., and then my father, after teaching public schools at Ballou here, history, for a couple of years, decided that he wanted to go back to law school, or wanted to go to school, to learn the law because of its intersection with history and all of the things that he was learning. And he got into the University of Miami, which is where both of my parents had grown up. And so we moved back to Miami. And the thing that was so pivotal for me about that experience is that we actually lived on the campus of the University of Miami when I was 4, 5, 6 years old. And I remember sitting at the kitchen table with my dad with his law books and I'm with my coloring books, and we're working together. And I never thought you could do anything but go to law school because that was my experience from that young. And it was such an impression that I always wanted to be a lawyer.
Yeah. All of this is incredibly familiar and legible to me, and I imagine many Black people who grew up in striving households of that era. And you write about the values of like grit and perseverance. That's and right. You got to get through this.
Yes.
I do wonder, and I wonder this for myself. The toll that takes on us. Also, have you thought about the weight that comes with the inheritance, of being the children of the first inheritors of the civil rights movement?
Well, there is some weight to it. I guess I was sort of a pleaser growing up. I just wanted to make my parents happy, and they just wanted me to do everything. And they always told me, has this thing been done before? When I was whining about doing something, my mother would say, I'm sorry, have you seen someone do this before? If this can be done, you can do it. And that was her attitude and the way in which they told me to approach the world. And I, embraced it. Yeah. I think the weight, to the extent that it existed for me at least, was I went to predominantly white public schools growing up. And I think being 1 or 2 or 3 in my honors classes and AP classes really sort of made me feel, by myself a fair amount, and also representing a fair amount. And so there's the pressure of not wanting to do poorly, of always wanting to be on top of everything, because you get a sense that people are watching to see how you're going to do in this environment.
Is that what drove your ambition? You were a wildly ambitious child.
I was. I was.
You, at 12 is when you decided you wanted to be a federal judge.
Pretty much. I was in middle school, and I learned about our birthday twin, Constance Baker Motley.
Briefly introduce us
yes.
to Constance Baker Motley.
So Constance Baker Motley was the first African-American female federal judge. And she's also the first Black woman to argue a case in the Supreme Court. In fact, she argued 10 cases in the Supreme Court and won 9 of them. She was amazing. She was an associate of Justice Marshall. She helped to argue and do the strategies behind Brown versus the board. But as I say in the book, and as I've said in these talks, she never had the chance to be on the Supreme Court because of the times in which she lived. And so for me, that makes me feel so grateful. But learning about her and knowing that she shared a birthday when I was in middle school, I said, I want to be a federal judge.
It's crazy. And stated in your application to Harvard College that you intended, this is what blows me away, you stated that you intended to be the first Black woman on the Supreme Court. You were, 17?
I did. I did.
Believe somebody when they tell you something, I suppose. But I do want, that level of ambition. Yeah. Was that driven by this idea of being the only person in those rooms?
I don't know. I haven't really sort of parsed it out. It was just always who I was. I think it was the feeling that was given to me by my parents that you really can do anything you want to do. So it was just a matter of identifying what it was I wanted to do and be, and then, you work hard to train yourself to be the best you can be in that position.
Did you ever at any point waver in that belief?
Not really, no. I mean, there were obvious times. So I talk in the book a little bit about arriving at Harvard, where I went for undergrad and law school. But I had gone to public schools. I didn't really know anything about Harvard except that we had gone there. My speech and debate team, I was an orator in high school, and our coach had taken us to various tournaments around the country, and Harvard had a tournament. And I thought, this seemed like a pretty nice school. Maybe I should apply. And I get in, and I go there, and it was so foreign. I mean, it was just completely a different world than South Florida. And I think there were times, especially my freshman year, when I felt like, what have I gotten myself into? Right. Can I really do this job?
Well, we will come back to that. We need to take a break. You're listening to Notes from America. I'm Wright, and I'm talking with Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson about her best-selling memoir, Lovely One. We are here with a live audience at the National Archives as part of the March On Festival. Coming up, we'll talk about the role of dissent on the court. But first, we're going to be treated to a performance by the wonderful group Women of the Calabash. Stay with us.
Ishe Oluwa, Kole Bajeo. Ishe Oluwa, Kole Bajeo. Kole Bajeo, Kole Bajeo. Ishe Oluwa, Kole Bajeo. Ishe Oluwa, Kole Bajeo. Ishe Oluwa, Kole Bajeo. Kole Bajeo, Kole Bajeo. Ishe Oluwa, Kole Bajeo. Ohuna fifeshe, Kole Daruo. Ohuna fifeshe, Kole Daruo. Kole Daruo, Kole Daruo. Ohuna fifeshe, Kole Daruo. Ishe Oluwa, Kole Bajeo. Kole
We're out here in front of the U.S. Supreme Court building. What brings you here?
Because it was on the way to the hostel that I'm staying at.
Do you know what building you're
I have
standing in front
no
of?
clue. It says equal justice under law, so.
To see the place where our future is going to be decided, and I don't know, to maybe send some good wishes to the people who are looking out for us, and maybe shake my fist a little bit at the ones that aren't.
This is my first time in DC, so I just wanted to come and see the most important building, especially this one.
What does this building represent?
It represents democracy. It is a physical representation of one branch of our federal government is right here. You can stand on it, you can feel it, you can touch it, you can go inside it.
Supreme Court cases obviously mean a lot to attorneys because we turn to them and we look to them. Justices are people we look up to.
It's very interesting to stand here and look at equal justice under the law and then think, but is it, with all the things that have been happening recently? And it makes you think about the people that are in there making those decisions.
What the court does is so critically important to individuals, to institutions, to families, and to generations of citizens. They make a huge, huge difference.
It's Notes from America. I'm Kai Wright, coming to you this week alongside a live audience at the National Archives in Washington, D.C. We are here for the March On Festival, and I'm joined by Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. We're talking about her new memoir, Lovely One. And Justice Jackson, as a sitting member of the court, you, of course, do not discuss specific cases or political debates. But we can talk a bit about being on the Supreme Court in this moment in history. In the voices you heard as we were coming back from the break, you heard a number of sentiments, but you did hear an echo of something our listeners have told us repeatedly on this show, which is that a lot of people really distrust the Supreme Court right now. And there is just a real question about the legitimacy of this institution. And so, you have joined this, you've made history joining this court at a time when it's a weird time in its history. And of course, you certainly don't need to answer for the actions that led to that. But I do wonder what you'd say to people who are simultaneously inspired by your appointment and not sure that they can believe in this institution to use its power fairly right now.
Well, I appreciated your segment of recording people in front of the court. I especially appreciated the person who said, this is a government institution. You can be here, you can touch it, you can go inside it. I would encourage people to continue to be engaged in their government. The idea of the Supreme Court sort of standing beyond and above public criticism and critique, I think, is not a sound one. We are a branch of government just like the other branches of government, and the thing that distinguishes us in a way is that we need public legitimacy. It is the way in which our opinions are enforced. We don't have an army, we don't have the power of the purse. What we have is people who believe in the rule of law and who trust this institution to safeguard it. And so what I would say is continue to engage, read our opinions, form your own opinions about what it is that the court is doing. I am doing what I can as a justice to try to explain to the public that law and politics are two different things, and to do what I know justices do and are supposed to do in our government.
You're obviously a student of the court's history and a deep student of civil rights history. You were sworn in on Justice Harlan's Bible.
I was.
So now I'm going to ask you for therapy for me about thinking about the Supreme Court. my armchair history of the court, I feel like its history is primarily one of restricting our rights, with the brief exception of a little period in the mid 20th century. So much of the history of the court has been tough for Black people. Is that a fair understanding of the court's history? How do you think about the court's history?
Well, I think the court has a long history. We go through different periods. The country has a long history,
Indeed.
and we go through different periods, some more difficult than others. You are not wrong to observe that there are times in which the court has ruled in ways that have impacted African Americans, and then we know that there are times when the court has done things like Brown versus the board that really made an enormous difference in the lives of African Americans in this country. So it's not linear, the life of the court.
Yeah, and a part of why I asked that is, we have generations of history of debate in the community about how do we make change, and there are folks who are like, there are folks who are like, we should go, we should leave, we should get out of here. There are people who are saying, we got to fight it from the outside, and then there are folks who are saying, we have to be in these institutions that are government. You are clearly someone, correct me if I'm wrong, who believes in the institutions.
Absolutely.
Of the United
It
States.
is an incredible honor to be able to serve the American people in this way. And I encourage anyone who really cares about government to get involved in some way, whether it be as a voter or as a person who decides they want to actually enter the institutions.
Can you make the case to that cynic who says, these institutions were built to keep us down? Why would I engage in them? This can't work. Can you make the case for why it can?
Well, all I can say is you talked about history. Think where we would be if that had been the prevailing attitude for people, when my grandparents were growing up. We have made so much progress as a country, in part because people have decided that we too are Americans, and we are entitled to participate and to do what we can to make this country better, to live up to the ideals that are in our Constitution. And that's what I'm trying to do and what I encourage other Americans to do.
You will, given the composition of the court, you'll likely spend a lot of time on the court writing dissenting opinions. Now, I don't want to presume anything, but those of us who watch from the outside can assume that there, in some of the most public and far-reaching cases, you're likely to write a lot of dissents. What is the role of a dissenting opinion in your mind? Like, how do you think about the purpose of dissent on the court?
Well, I think dissent is crucial in a lot of ways. One is that it really demonstrates to the public that there are different ways of thinking about legal issues, that there are reasonable debate about the issues of our time, that we can disagree without being disagreeable. All of these sort of modeling functions, I think, are very important. And it also gives those who disagree with the majority's view the opportunity to explain their position. And you hope that your explanation will be persuasive to people who will then take it in the future, perhaps, and make it the law.
One of your most widely discussed written opinions is your dissent in the court's 2023 ruling that struck down affirmative action at your alma mater, Harvard, and at UNC. And the majority opinion has been characterized as asserting that we have a colorblind society, and it certainly pointed to Brown v. Board as precedent for demanding race-neutral admissions policies. You wrote in your strongly worded dissent that ruling was, quote, truly a tragedy for us all. And you further pointed out that the majority stated that the ruling doesn't apply to military academies. And I just want to quote what you wrote. You wrote, "The court has come to rest on the bottom line conclusion that racial diversity in higher education is only worth potentially preserving insofar as it might be needed to prepare Black Americans and other underrepresented minorities for success in the bunker, not the boardroom." I wonder about your thought process in crafting that dissent. How did you think about what was important to say in that moment in history?
Well, one thing I will say is that my dissent was not the principal dissent in the case. I wrote an additional dissent. So in terms of the arguments that most directly responded to the majority's view, Justice Sotomayor wrote for me, Justice Kagan, and herself to make that kind of direct response. My dissent was designed to talk primarily about the history and about my just wanting to make sure that the public understood what at least my view was of the purpose of affirmative action, the reasons why these kinds of programs had been put into place to begin with, having to do with the arc of history and the ways in which African Americans had historically been treated. And I felt as though that had not been given sufficient attention in the majority opinion, and I wanted to highlight that reality.
That reality.
Yes.
Education it's been such a huge part of your story and your family's story, and access to it as Black folks in the 20th century, and certainly in the 21st century, but that generation in particular, it was such a big part of how we were brought up. I have to imagine that this was a uniquely difficult case to take on.
Well, there are many difficult cases on the Supreme Court.
Indeed. But and maybe this is something you can't speak to, but I imagine, given everything I know about your biography, having to weigh in on this question of whether or not affirmative action should exist. I wonder about the emotional reality of it.
Well, I will tell you what was particularly challenging for me was that it was one of the first cases I heard as a justice.
Right.
You can't control the timing of things, but I think I would have preferred to have been there for more than a minute before I had to deal with such a fraught issue. And there were aspects of the issue that absolutely had some resonance for me as an African American for whom education was extraordinarily important in my family and in my story. I think that happens in many cases for many justices. One of my favorite quotes is from Oliver Wendell Holmes, who said that the life of the law is not logic, it is experience. And so what judges are doing in many instances is evaluating the reliability or reasonableness of arguments in light of their understanding and their experience. And so I think having that case that early really did call upon experiences that may have been unique to me as the first African American woman on the court.
Any Supreme Court nomination at this point in history is a bit of a political spectacle. I cannot imagine that process. The concept of affirmative action was very much part of the public discussion around your nomination. I'd say even on our show, as it was unfolding and we were taking calls, we got a lot of calls from Black women who said, who were so happy, so thrilled by this, and also very frustrated that the president had even said that he was going to nominate a Black woman because it set up this conversation about your qualifications. And I guess it would be remiss for me not to ask you to answer those listeners who so many times wondered on our show how you navigated that moment where the historic nature of your nomination was put in tension with your qualifications?
I would say I paid very little attention to it. And the reason is because of my qualifications, because of my resume.
Yeah, clap.
I mean, that critique was clearly nonsensical when you looked at who I was, what I had done, how I was trained, where I went to law school, the 3 clerkships that I did, including on the Supreme Court. So I honestly did not pay much attention to that at all.
Dear listener, asked and answered. But so I do have to imagine how bizarre it would be to be at just the whole world is talking about you in that moment, and I can't imagine you see yourself like as a reflection of your actual human self in that conversation. Did you write this memoir in reaction to that? Was this your effort to tell them this is my story?
No, not really. I wrote this memoir out of gratitude, sheer gratitude. I started writing it just about little over 2 years ago, right after the confirmation. So grateful that I had survived what you say is a big public spectacle, and really wanting to pay tribute to the people and the circumstances that I felt were really the most responsible for preparing me for this moment, for helping me to be the person that I am and the lawyer that I am. And so the book is about explaining where I come from. And I thought it was important to do that.
This is Notes from America. I'm Kai Wright, and I'm talking with Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson about her best-selling memoir, Lovely One. We are here with a live audience at the National Archives as part of the March On Festival. Coming up, we'll talk about the Justice's background in stage performance and her Broadway dreams, plus some questions from students at Howard University. But first, here is another performance from the Women of the Calabash.
Why is it a kufamba? 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 Dongi. Why is it a kufamba? Dongi. Why is it a kufamba? Dongi monde buzi. 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 Ya boy dongi monde buzi. Dongi monde buzi. Dongi monde buzi. Dongi monde buzi. Dongi boy ya boy ya boy ya boy ya boy ya boy Whoa, whoa, ah.
It has taken 232 years and 115 prior appointments for a Black woman to be selected to serve on the Supreme Court of the United States. But we've made it. We've made it, all of us, all of us. And our children are telling me that they see now more than ever that here in America, anything is possible.
It's Notes from America. I'm Kai Wright, coming to you this week from the March On Festival with a fabulous live audience at the National Archives in Washington, D.C. I am joined by Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. We're talking about her new memoir, Lovely One. And Justice Jackson, my favorite part of your memoir is learning about your stage dream, not stage dreams, your stage realities. In high school in Miami, you were a fiercely competitive champion debater.
Yes.
But you did not compete in the categories where you just argue with each other.
Yes.
You competed in the performance categories.
Yes.
Tell me about that. You were a performer. Explain to
I was
people
a
who don't know this
performer
world.
in two different ways. People think of speech and debate, and you have an idea of the debaters who go back and forth and they argue, but there are also speech categories, and one of them, which was my main event, was original oratory, which is where you write your own speech and you memorize it, a 10-minute speech, and you perform it competitively in tournaments, and eventually, hopefully you make it to the final round, and then you are crowned the winner if you're lucky. And then there are dramatic and humorous interpretation categories, which are sort of like Anna Devere Smith's performances, one-woman performances, where you take plays and you cut them down into 10-minute segments and you embody the different characters. And you do that as sort of a 10-minute segment competitively. Yeah. And I did all three of those categories in high school.
It's so cool. One of the performances you write about in the memoir really stuck with me. It's one where you took two poems, one by Nikki Giovanni and one by Ntozake Shange, and remixed them.
Yes.
As a comment on the Black children who were being found murdered in Atlanta at that time.
Yes.
And I have asked you to read a bit of that part of it. So I've marked it here in the book. Okay. This is the section you're going to read. The section Justice is going to read, just to set it up for a second, begins with the poem, part of the poem from Ntozake Shange. So take it away.
'Cause he's black and poor, he's disappeared. The name was lost. The games weren't played. Nobody tucks him in at night, wipes traces of cornbread and syrup from his fingers. Every time the earth moves, it's me and all my friends flying underground, off to a soccer game or basketball, always running. I can make the earth move, flying underground. As I recited the braided piece, I continuously altered my countenance and inflection back and forth to signal changes between the two different narrators. First Shange, followed by Giovanni. No ropes this time, no tar and feathers. Weren't no parades of sheets, fires, and crosses. Nothing, no signs. Teacher says I do real good in school. I like to read books. I draw pictures with lots of sun and clouds.
Thank you for that. The piece goes on. There's more to it. That's a little piece of it. But what about these murders? What about that moment brought you to, what moved you to do that?
Well, I mentioned that I had grown up in predominantly white school settings, and I had a wonderful, wonderful debate coach, Fran Berger, who was fabulous, and she would offer her students pieces that she was familiar with from her repertoire. So I did a lot of Neil Simon and a lot of, plays of that genre. But I got to a point when I was maybe in 11th grade where I really noticed that in my rounds and in my competitions, there weren't a lot of pieces that represented my culture, my heritage. And so I decided, having lived through, I think the murders were within the decade before this period.
The early 80s.
Exactly. Having lived through that very, very difficult time for Black kids in the South, I wanted to do something that represented that. And so I created this piece, and I did it for the first time at Emory in Atlanta. And it was really quite something.
And won.
and won.
Yes. I remember those. I was a little kid at the time as well, and I remember being scared.
Terrified.
One of my few early childhood memories is fear
Yes.
because of that story.
Yes.
Did it impact you that same way?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there we are. We're young Black kids. I'm in Florida, and I just have a memory of turning on the news and they're saying these children are disappearing. Nobody can figure out where they are. They're turning up dead, and it was very, very, very stressful.
What is it about performance that drew you? Why? You already knew you wanted to be a Supreme Court justice. You wanted to be a lawyer. That's an arguing kind of space.
Well, again, I said my parents wanted me to do all the things. And so when I was, 5, 6, 7 years old, my mother had enrolled me in the Miami-Dade County Youth Fair speech program. And I was on the stage. One of my very first recitations was Margaret Walker. For my people everywhere singing their slave songs repeatedly. I memorized this when I was, 7 years old. And so I always had a love of being on the stage and performing.
Do you have declared that you want to be on Broadway? Do you intend to be on Broadway still?
I would love to. I mean, you mentioned my essay. What I said was I want to be the first Black woman Supreme Court justice to appear on a Broadway stage.
To be
very important.
So you are not yet done. Well, you got my ticket. In Miami, you had a childhood friend named Sunny, who you write about in the book. Yes. She was white.
Yes.
And you that was a special relationship for you.
Very special.
She shared with you at some point, I think after you were adults, that she had been hurt by the anti-Black racism that she saw you experience in your childhood. But you yourself remembered it. You thought, I don't know what she's talking about. I didn't have that experience. Why do you think that's the case? What do you think was the difference between the two there? That she was seeing this and you were like, eh.
I don't know. I don't know. It was surprising to me. Sunny's mother went back to law school, and she grew up on the campus of the University of Miami. And so she was my very first friend, the two of us there, little girls, on the law school campus. And we went to public elementary school, and years later she said, I noticed how some of the teachers were harder on the Black kids, and they would, punish people for small things, and Black kids, but not the white kids. And I had no independent memory of that, and I don't know why. I think part of perhaps my own way of moving through the world was not to pay attention focus on those sorts of things, because that just enabled me to do what it is that I needed to do.
Our show is usually a live call-in show where we invite listeners to join us by asking questions and share their own life experiences. Since we couldn't do that this week because we're here at the archives, what we did do was go over the campus of Howard University and offer students a chance to submit questions to you. Before I share a few of those, can you quickly, so there's a story in your memoir there that I love where you go and tell your grandmother about being admitted to Harvard. And she has a reaction. What was her reaction?
So my grandmother, who had no more than grade school education, but had worked hard as a nurse's aide to help put her children through historically black universities. My parents were first generation. I said, Grandma, I'm so excited. I got into Harvard. And she said, "Oh, Howard, baby, that is so wonderful." and I said, "Oh no, Grandma, I know I'd said I wanted to go to school in Washington, D.C., but this is a school in Massachusetts and it's really good." And she said, "Oh, well, I'm sure that Harvard is a perfectly good school too."
So that's for all of you Howard people out there, and all of your Howard chauvinism. Well, let's do some of these questions from Howard students. Here is the first one.
What inspired her, and like what inspires her to keep going? Because I'm sure it's a difficult position to be in.
And what keeps you going, I think.
Wow. You know, I'm inspired by history. I'm inspired by the women and the people who came before me, who paved the way for me to be doing this job. And what keeps me going is the young people who I hope that I'm inspiring, that paying it forward, passing it along.
That this cross-cultural or cross-generational dialogue, right?
Yes.
That your parents, we were the inheritors of their work. Maybe these young people will be the inheritors of your work. I can hear that. Let's hear the next one.
What would you say to young black girls who are looking up to you and wanting to be in these positions of power?
And I think just to elaborate on it a little bit, like the idea of stepping into power.
Yes.
Yes. And specifically stepping into power as a black woman.
Yes.
What is your advice for that?
Oh my goodness. Well, you know, I feel like you have to own your greatness, you know, and we have so many opportunities now, and you have to prepare yourself to take advantage of them. When I went through my investiture for my very first court appointment, I was appointed as a trial judge first, and my daughters were at that point 7 and 5 or something. As part of my speech, I gave them advice, and I think it's the same advice I would give to your listener. I said, you know, girls, you know, if you take anything from my lessons, from my life, it is to work hard, be kind, have faith, and believe that anything is possible. And I really mean that.
I mean, it does make me return to the weight of it. You know, and how you manage the weight of it.
Well, you know, you have to decide what it is that you want to do and be. You know, anything that you want to do or anything that's worth doing takes a lot of effort, a lot of work. And so the question is, what are you willing to work for? And once you've identified that, then you just go for it with all of your ability.
I'm going to play one more, which is basically the bit of the same thing I just asked you, but I want to hear the student ask it as well.
How do you do it? I don't know if I could just be in her position. I mean, I know, especially with her being the first black woman, she's doing it for a reason that's greater than herself. But I wonder, how does she not have those moments where, whether it be imposter syndrome or, again, whenever she is in one of those moments that we saw her in a little over a year ago where she has to justify her actions. My thing is just, how does she manage to stand so strong?
Great question. I again go back to my parents, how I was raised. They're instilling in me a very strong sense of who I am and what I can do. And so there now are very few imposter syndrome moments because I'm prepared for this, because I worked hard for this. When I did my Supreme Court investiture speech, I said, I have a seat at the table now and I'm ready to work. And I am. So I just think you have to get to the point in your life where you've decided this is the path I'm going to take, and you put everything into preparing yourself to be the best you can be. And when the moment comes, you'll be ready.
When you wrote that at 8 years old was the first time you started to see the idea of like having a public face. And you quote in the book at length W.E. Du Bois's double consciousness about striving, achieving Black people, and this need to be two people at once. Do you still have that? At 8 years old, you had that, you were putting that public face on, and you talked about how it made you sort of go away by yourself sometimes. Do you still feel like you have to wear that?
I feel like there's a species of that makes me actually introverted in some way. Even though I have loved being on the stage and I love being performing, I think in my heart of hearts, I like to be by myself because it's, as I say in the book, a soul deep sigh of relief, because you feel like you don't have to always be representing. But, I'm honored to do it in this position.
Ketanji Brown Jackson is an Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court. Her memoir is called Lovely One. Justice Jackson, thank you so much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be here. Thank you.